In Boston, Massachusetts, in May 1993, Vivian Forrester and her mother, Maria Forrester, met up for the first time in 9 years to try and mend their strained relationship. And after a disagreement between the pair occurred, Maria came down with a migraine that rendered her almost blind. Now, regardless of their difficult relationship, Viv did not want to just leave her mother alone like that. So she took her to a nearby hotel named the Great Thistle and booked her into a room. Only, on returning from the store to pick up some supplies, Viv discovered something unexplainable. There was no room 56. Not only had Maria Forrester disappeared without a trace, but no one in the hotel recalled having ever seen her. This is Viv's account, which she told the journalist Kit Michaels shortly after. She insists that her mother seemingly disappeared from existence. This is Viv's story. As a child, I idolized my mother. She was effortlessly beautiful with her long dark curls and her naturally plumped lips. I hoped and I wished that I would grow up to be just like her, but I didn't. Instead, I grew up to be the opposite. As I grew older, I learned that the beauty, that was all my mother really cared about, whereas I valued other things in life. I think, at the time, she would have chosen a bottle of expensive skin lotion over providing for me. She used to line her different lotions and ointments up on the shelf and trail her index finger over them. I left home at 17 and moved in with my wayward boyfriend. My mother hated him, and I also felt, at times, like she hated me. As I left, a pink hold-all in hand, she yelled so loudly the whole neighborhood must have heard it. Giving birth to you aged me. It was the worst mistake I ever made. I saw that regret in her eyes, and I knew as soon as those words left her lips that she regretted them. But she didn't say anything to try to put this right. She didn't try to take them back. After that, I didn't talk to my mother. She didn't talk to me. I had a string of awful relationships until I finally found a good one and I settled down. I didn't invite my mother to the wedding, nor did she come to my daughter Lily's christening. I lived my life just fine without her. That's a fact that I feel guilty for now. I should have reached out to her sooner. I should have at least told her about Lily. She only found out she was a grandma at my cousin's funeral. This was the first time that I'd seen and I'd spoken to my mother in 9 years. And as my relatives mentioned Lily in front of her, I saw how disheartened she really looked. It was this exhausting funeral, as ones for those who died long before their time always are. So I ignored my mother's snide remarks and instead I showed her photos of Lily. She seemed to soften, and I started to believe maybe we could rebuild our relationship. And when she mentioned having lunch in the city next week, I agreed, naively thinking this was the start of her making amends and actively wanting to be a part of mine and my daughter's lives. Well, I booked us into a nice enough restaurant, one that I could afford. I should have known this wouldn't have been good enough for my mother. She arrived 20 minutes late, stuck her nose up at the patterned walls and eclectic furnishings and remarked on how I could have found a better restaurant. Yeah, well, through gritted teeth, I told her this was not about the restaurant. It was about our relationship, or the lack of it. It should not have mattered if we met up in an alleyway. The location should not have been an issue. I felt like I was wasting my time, so I told my mother we should just leave it. I placed enough money on the table to cover our drinks and the tip, and then I started to leave. And on hearing the commotion behind me, well, I turned and I saw my mother, hands clutched to the top of her head as she rocked back and forth. The waiting staff were swarming around her like flies, asking her what was wrong. And as infuriating as my mother was, I was not gonna leave her in pain. I rushed over to her and I asked her, what was wrong? She cried out that she had a migraine and her entire head felt like it was vibrating. It was so bad she could barely see. And the restaurant wanted to call an ambulance, but my mother refused. She didn't want to waste anyone's time over a migraine, so she said that she just needed to lie down for a few hours and to sleep it off. I had taken the train into the city. I don't have a license. I never needed one in Boston, and my mother was in no fit to drive. I let her out of there and into the back of a taxi, and I told that driver take us to the closest hotel, and figuring that my mother would expect me to pay for it, I whispered to him in a voice that my mother couldn't hear, to make sure it's one of the ones under $40 a night. And he gave that knowing nod, and he just drove us to a quiet area closer to the harbor. The hotel was up a quiet, run-down back street and called the Great Thistle. And with its faded bronze paintwork and aged-looking sign and dated decor, there didn't seem much great about it, but it seemed clean enough. They had an available room, and apart from the receptionist, there was only one other person in the lobby, an elderly man in a gray mac and a checked cap, and he gave me this gummy smile, and I smiled back. He watched me walk my mother over to the reception desk, but he did not say anything. I didn't think anything of that at the time, presuming he was just some lonely old man. There was this haunting piano music playing from somewhere. No sign of any piano. My mother heard it, even through her migraine, as in a loud voice she said, "Will someone tell that tone-deaf pianist to stop before my head explodes?" The girl behind the counter heard her but just glared at me. She was young, early 20s at most. I explained the situation and I asked her if she had a room. She passed me this clunky brass key with 6 written on it in patchy silver letters, a faded gap where the number 5 must have been. The piano music, it seemed to follow us up that narrow staircase and on to the landing. I helped my mother along. I was looking at the door numbers, 55, 57, 58, but it took me ages to find 56. But I found it eventually. At the end of the hallway on the left-hand side, there was a door on its own. 2 paintings on the mustard-colored wallpaper, either side of it, one of the city and the other of the harbor. I unlocked that door and I helped my mother over to the single bed with the busy floral print covers that I knew she would detest. The midnight blue walls made this room feel small, and the only other piece of furniture in the room was an old wicker chair in the corner. And on her request, I closed the velvet red curtains. I noticed how they itched beneath my touch. And in the gloomy light, I told my mother I was going to get painkillers and some water for her. I'd be back soon. And I took the key with me, believing that the night latch would mean no one else could get it. But if needed, my mother could get out. Yeah. How wrong I was about that. Thinking back on that, I handled it all wrong. I should have never left her, but I didn't know what was about to happen. And I didn't know that I was never gonna see her again. I was gone for about 20 minutes at the most, and when I returned, the elderly man was still sitting in that same spot. And he gave me that gummy smile and he muttered, "You're out of time. You missed it." And he looked at his watch and then he placed it to his ear. I put it down to his age and I carried on walking past him and the now empty reception desk and up the narrow staircase. And the piano music played all around me. It was so loud and it suddenly seemed deafening. And I sighed to myself, certain that my mother could hear it, would moan at me. And then I walked to the end of the hallway and I pressed my hand to the spot between the paintings. The spot I am certain the door to room 56 had just been. There was no door and it didn't make any sense. Room 56 had just been there and now it wasn't. I thought I made a mistake. I hurried up and down the corridor, checking each of the door numbers again and again. My breathing increased and my mind muddled. It had been there. I held the clunky key in my hand and I looked at that faded number next to the 6. I went down to reception flustered and confused as I placed the key onto the desk and I addressed the same girl who was there. Room 56, where is it? My mother's in it, but I can't seem to find it. And the girl arched her brow and gave me this bemused look as she replied, "Miss, there is no room 56. I told her of course there was. She had seen me in here with my mother. She had given me the key. And she shook her head. She pointed at my key and she said, "Now you came in here alone and you asked for a room. Well, we told you we didn't have a room available. This is for room 46. This one is Bernard's." I followed her gaze over to the old man, who was still sitting in the lobby, nodding his head in time to the music, that piano music playing from nowhere. I thought this must be some kind of joke, that she had set this whole thing up out of boredom, and I rushed back upstairs. The key was rattling in my hand as I once again walked up and down that corridor trying to find the room that I knew had been there half an hour ago. That room that my mother was in. I felt like I was losing it. I stared at the spot that I was sure that the door had been in, and I started to think that I had mistaken it in haste to get my mother into the room. But the receptionist said I'd come here alone. It didn't make any sense. As I stared at that mustard wall, I was trying to work out what the hell was going on, and I realized that piano music had stopped. There was this silence, and all I heard was my thudding heart. And then, through those walls, I heard a wail, a woman's wail, and fists were knocking against that wall, this constant banging beneath and the screeching. Someone was trapped in the walls. My mother was trapped in those walls. I clawed at the wallpaper with my fingernails. These bits of dust and wallpaper were sticking beneath my fingernails as I yelled out to my mother to speak to me. I was telling her that it would be okay, that I would get her out of there. I fell to my knees. My hands were bloodied and bruised, and the strips of paper was peeling all around me, revealing no plasterboard, but just a solid brick wall. The wailing and the banging had stopped, and I was aware that piano music was playing all around me, and I felt a hand on my shoulder, and I looked up to see that man there. His owl-like eyes were staring down at me, and he said he was the manager, and he escorted me out of there. I told him he needed to help my mother, but he didn't listen. He told me no one had seen my mother and there was no room 56. I showed him the painkillers and the water that I'd bought for her. I pointed at the girl. I said she'd seen my mother. She was lying. I said that the old man had seen her too. It felt horrible knowing that everyone was lying to me. And I don't know if they dragged me down the stairs or if I walked there freely. I just remember being in the lobby and its darkness was seeming to shroud me. And that piano music was playing so loudly, I could barely think. The old man was still sitting there, tapping his watch to his ear. And on seeing me, he gave me that gummy smile. He said, "I saw her too. She looks like you. All hope is lost in room 56. And I gripped his arm. I begged him, tell me where my mother was. And he looked gormlessly at me. He didn't say one other word. The manager escorted me out and he told me not to come back. He locked the door behind me. I banged on it. The clunky key was still clutched in my grip. The key that I used to unlock a room that no longer seemed to exist. None of this made any sense. But that room had vanished, and in doing so had my mother. I went to the police station and I told them what had happened. Although I saw the disbelief in their eyes, they humored me. And they said that they would check the hotel out that evening. They said they couldn't find a Great Thistle hotel registered. That sometimes hotels change their name, causing this delay on their records. They asked me to show them where it was. I took them there, up that quiet, run-down row of old buildings in that forgotten part of the city. I stopped in front of that building with the peeling bronze paint and that didn't understand it. The windows were boarded up. The sign had gone. It looked like it had been empty for years. That didn't make any sense. I'd just been in the hotel, and now there wasn't any hotel to go into. I was hysterical. I shook that key at them. I insisted this was it. My mother was trapped in there, in room 56. As they tried to move me away, that music started playing. That piano music. That same haunting melody from the hotel. I frantically looked all around me. I was desperate to find the source. But that music seemed to come from nowhere. But the police heard it too. They said it was probably coming from one of the nearby buildings. They didn't listen to me. They just led me away from the Great Thistle Hotel where I'd taken my mother. I tried everything to make the police listen to me. I tried to find the taxi driver who had taken me to the hotel. That seemed impossible. I went into the restaurant that I'd taken her in. They remembered me, and then they gave me these puzzled looks when I mentioned the woman with the migraine. And now, when I mention my mother to people, they give me those gormless looks and simply reply that I have no mother. I do have a mother. That Great Thistle Hotel took her from me. I heard her wails coming from the walls. I left her there. I was never close to my mother, but I still loved her. She was my mother. But because of me, she may as well not exist anymore. And because of me, I believe that she is still out there, a ghost of her own time, wailing in between the walls. To this day, Vivian Forrester insists that she went into the Great Thistle Hotel with her mother, Maria Forrester, but that the room that she left her in vanished and took her mother with it. The next time Vivian returned to that building a few months later, it was being converted into apartments. And on completion, she looked around one of those apartments that was for sale, hopeful that she would find some clues to her mother's disappearances, but she found none. And to this day, people in the area have complained to authorities. They heard loud piano melodies coming from an unidentifiable place nearby. And according to the records, Maria Forrester never existed. Maria seemed to disappear from existence, with only Viv adamant that she did have a mother and that she left her in room 56, the Vanishing room. They say grief plays tricks on the mind, but a missing hotel, a mother that no one remembers, and piano music from nowhere, well, that's something else entirely. And if you believe Vivian's story, or if something like that ever happened to you, please leave a comment below. And if you want to hear more stories like this one, subscribe before the music starts again. Because once that melody begins, you might forget that you were ever here.